Got it.
Okay.
Okay, super.
Well, to start off with, could you say your name and where you are, please?
My name is Michael Henderson, and I am in Cape Town in South Africa.
Wonderful.
Hmm.
And the first big question is, who are you? That is,
Ooh,
hmm,
ooh, start straight for the jugular.
yeah.
Who
It
am
can,
I?
it can be values, principles, qualities, existential musings, whatever you'd like.
Ooh, how much time we got? Okay, so let's start on the surface and we'll see how deep we go. I am an OD consultant and a coach. I probably spend about 60 to 70% of my time doing one-on-one and team coaching, small team coaching. And the rest of the time is organizational work and training with mostly through Gestalt Africa, which we'll probably talk about a little bit more later on. So that's what I do for a living. I am a husband. I've got a wife and a 3-year-old daughter. And I now live in this beautiful part of Cape Town called Half Bay, which is kind of about a half an hour outside the city, in a very green, lush valley, which, yeah, it's been quite an interesting experience. I used to live like right in the middle of the city, and I never felt like I was somebody who needed to live in the middle of nature. Like I was always fine living in city, and then I moved out here and realized this is where I need to be. So and we've only been here for 6 months, so this has been a really cool little sort of, I guess it's like a full stop on COVID. I think our COVID, my daughter was born like right in the middle of COVID. So COVID was quite an intense time for us, I guess, as it was for everybody. And then this is sort of the end point of all of that whole process. So yeah, it feels really, really good to be here. At a sort of more detailed level, I suppose I'm a thinker, I'm a reflector. I'm very much motivated by this, I suppose, by depth psychology, by Jungian work, and by this idea that we're here for something, for some kind of reason, and our job is to find out why. So I've dedicated probably the last 10 years of my life to finding some answers to that question for me, and doing a lot of it with my clients. So I think that's the work that really lights me up. Helping people get in touch with some higher sense of purpose or meaning, or however they kind of choose to frame it. Yeah.
And how is that going for you? I don't think I've ever asked anybody, what is your purpose? If you got some insight on that, I'd be very curious.
Yeah. So the first part, how's it going for me? Slowly is probably the most truthful answer. I guess, I mean, it's a bit kind of outside in, working with people to help open doors. Doors of perception, kind of seeing a little bit more about themselves, about others, about the world, about how things, kind of peeking below the surface, looking at maybe some of the architecture of themselves, the systems, the places that they find themselves. It's probably a little bit vague, but that's as close as I can get to saying that feels like where I'm at the moment in terms of why I'm here and how I think I can be helpful to other people. Yeah.
I mean, it sounds like you at least have some clarity on the mechanism of how to go about achieving that purpose.
Yeah. I mean, it's emerging. Changes kind of all the time, but yeah. I think well, I suppose I've been trying to figure out what's the entry point, right? Is it working one-on-one with individuals? Is it working with teams? Is it working with you know, in like a training context where you've got people who don't know each other, like sort of strangers in a room together, helping them forge their relationships? Is it working with full organizations or big systems? You know, so I've spent quite a lot of time trying to figure that out. And I suppose, yeah, I think it's probably a little bit of all of them, but the individual work is probably my biggest interest. You know, I started life as a management consultant. So I worked in finance and blah, 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 all sorts of stuff in the UK. And then I went to Southeast Asia and I worked in the development sector. I thought I'd find my meaning helping to develop the Cambodian economy, recovering after the Khmer Rouge. And when I was in Cambodia, I started getting very interested in psychology and human behavior. And I was seeing in these projects we're doing these big fancy World Bank projects to try and improve export and import processes and process maps and very, very technical, complex stuff. And in the process of doing that work, I started seeing like the things that made a difference were the relational aspects. It was whether this person trusted that person, or whether this person had the maturity to understand that they did X because of Y, you know. So there's all these like subtle behavioral things that had a much bigger impact on the project than any of the technical analysis work. So I got super interested in that. And then I thought, my calling is to be a psychologist. So I packed my bags and bundled back to South Africa. I'd been away for about almost 10 years by that point. And I dived back into university and I did all sorts of applied work. And I thought the psychologist couch was where I was headed. And it took me about 3 years of immersion in that to realize that working that intensely one-on-one with people isn't really my thing. And then I sort of put the two pieces together. So the behavioral work and the organizational work, I kind of stuck those together. So yeah.
Zooming in and zooming out.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of curious what you would say are some of the core values or fundamental principles that you orient around, even on all of these different levels of engagement?
Yeah. So I think my instinctive answer to that is if I had to, I know this isn't what you're asking, but if I had to pick a kind of school or a philosophy that I feel I resonate most with, it would be Taoism. Yeah, which is sort of famously hard to define and unconcrete, and you know, all of the wonderful stuff that makes for vague conversations. But yeah, Taoist philosophies of you know, represented by yin and yang, and the flow between them, and the fact that the art, I suppose, of navigating through life, through work, through the world, whatever it might be, is to be able to have range, the masculine approach, the feminine approach, however that shows up, and be able to move between them depending on the moment. Yeah, so that's I don't know if that sounds very very vague, but that's about as close as I can get to a kind of orienting principle for my life. Yeah.
Fair enough. So maybe something more specific. What would come to mind for you as a particular event or a set of circumstances that you would say really influenced who you are as a person?
Sure. So I'm surprised by what's just sort of popped into my head. So I'll go with that just to be working in the moment. My parents separated when I was about 20 something, 22, 21 or something, young, early 20s. I was at university. And, you know, so I wasn't 10, you know, I was sort of young adult. And I knew their marriage wasn't particularly happy, and I guess in my sort of then teenage head, I'd always kind of assumed that they would get divorced. I think I remember at some point kind of always almost asking why they weren't divorced. And then I remember getting a call in our digs. I was at university here in Cape Town, and it was from my old man telling me that they were getting separated, that they had separated. And it was completely devastating for me. And apart from the devastation, I was completely sort of disoriented by the fact that I was devastated. I'd assumed this was going to happen. I thought it would be totally normal, and then it happened, and I was swept off my feet, and I was completely upside down. So I suppose maybe it was just a naivety thing of, a young person's idea, oh, if something's bad, you end it and then it's good, right? As opposed to the complexity and the nuance and the messiness of life, where, a marriage that doesn't work, when you split up, it doesn't kind of miraculously make everybody happy. So it was probably a lot of naive worldviews cracking at that point. I think on top of that, I had in my high school and university time been quite involved in the church, in kind of sort of new age Christian, whatever that scene was. And I guess it was about kind of faith foundations were probably cracking already, but at that point, the whole ship just collapsed and fell apart. And, in hindsight, I guess I realized that I'd been like holding this whole sort of Christian worldview together with my own energy, like with my willpower, effectively. And when my willpower was a bit, when I kind of fell apart a little bit and I was pretty shattered, I think I didn't have the energy, I didn't have the strength to hold this all together, and then the whole thing collapsed. So that was a pretty pivotal moment. It was wonderful in hindsight. It freed up a lot of well, it freed me up to sort of start emerging as an adult, as me, rather than as this construct that I'd kind of grown up into. And one of the interesting parts of that was how long it took for these religious worldviews, like the doctrine, the rules, how long it took for those to not have an effect on me. It was extraordinary. I mean, it must have taken 5, 6, 7 years before I could function in the world in a way that I chose to, rather than this book that somebody had written had dictated to me. So that process as well was really interesting and taught me a lot about how much weight, how strong these worldviews are that people grow up with, and when they decide to change their whatever it is, that was religion, but it could be a dozen of other things. How much effort that takes, and how long the process can take. Yeah, it's not just a mental decision.
Yeah, I think there's very little preparation for collapse and grief. I mean, these are, people get like transformation and moving on, and the actual experience of like absolute rock bottom structural system collapse.
Collapse.
Grief, a whole other thing.
Yeah. But yeah, so like god awful to go through, but extremely valuable to go through, because I now have some sense of what that means. When you talk about rock bottom structural collapse, I'm like, yeah, okay, I get what that is. So I guess part of our work is having had these experiences that allow us to help other people who may be having similar experiences. So very grateful for it, but not at the time.
No. Yeah, that makes sense. So in another maybe related question, about sort of external things and impacts on you, who comes to mind as having been a human being who has somehow touched or transformed the way you are in the world?
I seem to be going back to my roots a lot with your questions. So I'll follow that. My grandfather stands out. My mother's father. When we were kids, my grandparents lived on a farm in a place called Nottingham Road. So like in the foothills of the Drakensberg Mountains. Really beautiful, beautiful place. And they had a small farm with pigs and sheep and a couple of cows and some horses. Like a kind of small scale stuff, but enough to give us an experience of farm life, which we probably thought we were quite clever about. But my grandfather, or maybe I'll have to talk about this in relation to my father, because that's the kind of contrast that stands out. My grandfather was very much a proponent of just go out and do something and learn from it. Whereas my father was very much like, get to the point where you're not going to make a mistake and then go and try it out, you know. So it was very, very, you know, learning to drive. There was a lot of time spent in parking lots of big shopping malls, driving around and around and around before we were trusted to go on the streets. Whereas my grandfather was like, oh, take the car, don't crash. You know, he had this wonderful permissiveness about him. He knew what was going on, I think, in hindsight, but he just let us explore. And it's, I guess I felt older than I was with my grandfather. You know, I felt like an adult when I was still a kid. And it was he had this wonderfully, he was very keen on learning. Like, he didn't care what the field was. He was a wordsmithy kind of English buff, and he always used to talk about the new words he was learning in the crossword. This was from like a 70-year-old man, new words he was learning in the crossword, or he would learn calligraphy, or he would, you know, learn how to be a farmer, whatever it was. And he was really interested in our learning. So there was always something going on, and he'd make life really interesting and fun. So I think, yeah, he had a really positive. I've started a creative project, writing a novel, and he kind of appeared as one of the characters in this story. So yeah, I think he had a wonderful sort of, everything's going to be okay. If you crash the car, the world is not going to end. You know, don't have a head-on collision. But he knew the difference between real danger and little mistakes that lead to learning. Really, it was a wonderful influence, actually. Really cool. Yeah.
I think there's something about grandparents, you know, as I've interviewed them and reflected on them and with them, they seem to have a little bit more clarity about younger human beings having autonomy and identity. And a little bit more of that Gestalty kind of thing of just let them be, they'll figure it out, they will emerge, they'll, you know, you can't do it for them.
Yeah.
Because it seems like they've tried and it didn't usually work that well, and there's been a little bit of learning to let go by that phase.
Yeah. Maybe that's the wisdom that comes from having had kids, watching them grow up and being one step removed from the responsibility of picking up the pieces if it falls
Probably
over.
a little less invested, yeah. But
It really made me appreciate the value of grandparents, you know, other than just like, oh, they're the people who give you presents at Christmas, but, you know, really, I suppose actually, now that I kind of go into this, we used to call them Pa's impact on me as a grandparent makes me conscious of my parenting style with my daughter, you know, and how I want to be and who I want to be. So yeah, that's interesting. Yeah.
it's nice that you got her some green space too.
Yeah.
Okay. So another question about different aspect of yourself is how over time you have come to experience and understand yourself within your gender or masculinity or as a man, or however you'd like to take that.
Huh. 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 So what comes up for me? I suppose masculine and feminine principles. This comes from Taoism. The masculine and feminine principles in a person are interesting to me and are more live than how you identify from a gender perspective. So when I came back to South Africa to start studying psychology, and I did applied counseling. I used to be a counselor for a crisis helpline. So I had to go through all sorts of, all the standard training that we go through to learn how to be a counselor and a coach and the sort of early stages of therapeutic support. And a lot of that was about connecting to self and how you feel. And I had an awful realization at the beginning of this process when people kept asking me how I felt, and I had no idea how I felt. And why are you asking me this question?
It's awkward, isn't it? Keep insisting.
And they just kept on asking it, and I would get angry and irritated and all sorts of things. And finally, I realized, oh shit, I don't actually know how I feel. So that was quite a horrifying awakening, I suppose, uncomfortable. And that led to me doing all sorts of work, all the work that we do in our training to connect to myself and to what's going on in me. And it was very awkward. I kind of grew up in this very masculine world. I went to an all boys boarding school. I played rugby. I was, that whole drama. And we didn't spend a lot of time talking about our feelings. And it was a big unwinding of that and a necessary entering of quite a clumsy phase with myself. All these feelings came pouring out. I didn't know what to do with it. I used to break down in floods of tears at a moment's notice. It was quite a unsettling sort of time. I would have been in my mid-30s. So quite a strange time for me. But then, I would say that's the beginning of this integration, I suppose, of these different parts of myself and opening up to more of the unknown parts of myself. So I've done lots of work on this, and I suppose a lot of the work that I do with leaders is around, I work not exclusively and not by design, but I just seem to end up working more with men and who are in the same boat and who struggle with working with their emotional states and how to use their emotional states and so on. So I'm very interested in bringing these masculine and feminine principles out and together and helping people work with them. And it feels a little overstated to say healing the rift in the world between these parts, but we have extremely, I don't know what the kind of organizational context is like where you are, but with us, many organizations are still extremely masculine places. Even when they're full of women, they're still very masculine. You've got a masculine kind of architecture and feel to them. And a lot of the work is breaking that down and allowing them to be a little bit more fluid with how they show up. So am I answering your question? I'm not sure. But that's, something along those lines. But from a gender perspective, let's answer that. I suppose, well, the personal thing is I identify as a man. I don't have any, I haven't personally ever engaged any thoughts of whether my essence is something different. I don't know a huge amount about gender identity. It feels extremely delicate territory. I think I'm kind of terrified of it because it's full of landmines. It's easy. It feels like there are people with extremely strong opinions, and if you go treading into the wrong terrain, landmines can blow up. So I'm interested in it and a bit sort of I will engage with it from the sideline is probably how I feel about it. But certainly interested, and if I'm invited in, I'm always yeah, I'd kind of love to know more. It feels I don't know why I'm keeping going with this, but it feels so live at the moment with like super strong views on every side, and I don't feel like the conversation needs another strong view, and certainly not from somebody as informed as me. And I wonder at a kind of progression level, the conversation is new, I think, relatively new. Yeah, when I say new, not like this week, but in the sort of relatively new, and I'm curious of what it will look like when the newness has subsided. That's my curiosity. Yeah.
I'm imagining it will be just a pretty similar question to, addressing, women's rights or, hey, what do you think? Should women be allowed to vote?
Mm.
I mean, if I ask you about gender identities in 30 years, hopefully it won't
Mm.
feel nearly as novel.
Mm.
There will be some
Mm.
assimilation of,
Yeah.
coming to prominence and being assimilated.
Mm. I do have, after saying I know very little about it and don't have a strong view, I'm talking quite a lot about it. But, as Gestalt practitioners, we are very strong about going back to the data. What is the data? And we know we have got this binary construct of men and women. We had this binary construct. We know that biologically, that construct doesn't hold. We know that there are people who fit neither men, women. So just that, you've got this like binary construct on a non-binary reality.
Yeah,
There we go.
It seems like as soon as you're able to realize that questioning the supposedly fundamental underpinning of the whole thing, the rest of it should just be able to fall apart. But I think it comes back to that whole idea of no one is prepared for collapse.
Mm.
Don't quite know how to deal with it. We're usually taught how to avoid it, be that a paradigm, a way of thinking, a framework, a marriage.
Do you think that's where the radical, because it seems like there's a lot of people feel threatened by it. So when, the vociferous responses against this conversation, people who pull back very strongly to say, no, you're either a man or you're a woman, or get out. There's a need that they have, which is holding very tightly to this, like, this is how the world is. So our assumption that if it's too scary for them, if that falls apart, then what else is going to crack?
Right, because I think it underpins a lot of social privilege structures, right? And so that's usually where the fear comes in, is especially if you're someone who's going to lose if privilege is restructured. Let's not do that.
But how,
if it's a principle on which, I have in my comfortable mind and my worldview hierarchized human beings, consciously or unconsciously, when that starts to shake, I have a lot of work to do. And it might be uncomfortable, and I may have to redistribute some resources or some, value systems.
Yeah, fascinating.
I mean, from my own ignorance of the South African context, I can say it sounds kind of like someone questioning apartheid when it was a very conveniently, binary, hierarchized social, political, economic system. undoing that required a lot of restructuring. But the fundamental premise was flawed. It was biased. It was off.
Yeah, no question. But in that example, in the apartheid example, it's easy to say it was threatening for many white people. You know, apartheid privileged, can you use the word, privileged white people. So to question that would threaten white people.
Mm-hmm.
So in the gender thing, are we saying is who the privileged people?
I think in general, it's the male privilege.
So there's this hierarchy of not masculine, male over female. Do you think there's more resistance? Is there a marked difference in the resistance from males than from females?
Well, if you follow the math and who has more to lose in a restructuring, yes. I mean, you said it yourself. Who knows why you end up working with more males in leadership positions? Gee, who knows?
Yeah. It's interesting. I don't know. Yeah, there's something in me that wonders if it's more, I suppose I go to this conservative part of the population that needs structure. You know, if it's a Christian, you know, look at the example I gave, the kind of religious Christian doctrine was the structure on which your world sat. And if you start questioning some of the supports of that structure, if you question one support, where else does it go? So I don't know. I suppose I wonder if it's more just a general fear that the whole house is going to fall down than, yeah, I don't know. Mm-hmm. I don't know.
Well, I mean, that is my next question, which is how you have come to understand.
How's the house going to fall down?
Yeah, how's the house doing? No, it's about your own experience and understanding of your own privilege and power in the world that you live in. How have you used them, understood them, and experienced them?
I have just about every privilege you could name. And I grew up in that system. So I'm in the South African context, white, male, upper middle class. My old man was a doctor, went to fancy school and da-da-da. So it's hard to think it's hard to think of anything else I could have had that would give me more privilege, more power. Do I want to say power? Yeah, more power. So, well, can I give a long answer to that? So I grew up very unpolitically aware. I had an older brother who's extremely politically aware and was arrested for protesting against the government and, you know, very dialed into what was going on in apartheid and in the country. I lived in this privileged little bubble. And I really, really wasn't very conscious at all. And when I moved to Cambodia, I went there on my own, didn't know anyone. I was completely just throwing myself into the deep end and met a bunch of wonderful people. And there people started asking me, what did you do during apartheid?
That's uncomfortable.
Uh-huh. you think? I was like, well, I was only 15. And they're like, yeah, cool. But what were you doing? Like, what were your parents doing? And I was a lot of stuttering and uncomfortable mumbling and sort of trying to defend myself and realizing quite quickly there was no defense to it. And that triggered a lot of, guilt and remorse and all the sort of angsty, horrible stuff that we have to go through. So how the second part of your question was, how do I use how do I use it now?
Because I mean, it's not the point of this is not to shame or put you into evidence of what you didn't do. I'm going to assume from the Gestalt principle that things that could have been done were probably out of awareness. No one was inviting you into this openly.
Yeah, sure. Most definitely. But I know your intention is not to shame me, but I don't think people can go through that process without feeling shame. I think it's a necessary part. There's an appropriate shame. I won't
take that opportunity to feel things away from you, but I'm not intentionally trying to.
Robert, yeah.
I did that. There was another interview where I very enthusiastically asked someone who was, probably a little bit older than you, white South African. I was like, "What did you do?" And their answer was, "I left the country." I was like, "Oh," and I think my face was probably just like disappointment, and I understand it. But if I ask myself, what did I do? Not much in a lot of the major political and social events around me in my time. So
yeah. So I think what do I do with it now? How does it impact me and us and now is very live. And I suppose the short answer to it is I don't know, still trying to figure it out. I'm very South Africa is such a complex place to operate because I'm very aware that I come in with power. There's a certain historical power that I would come in with. And if I'm working with a group, we've done quite a lot of work with governments. If I'm working with a government department or some group, I come in with power in a certain way and people will listen to what I have to say in a certain way. And there's a real need to sub up to not play into that, certainly not to get enticed by it. You've interviewed my business partner, Jeremy, Tim. We get on really well. We love working together, and we don't because two white guys, right? We can't. Jeremy and I can't. We've worked together once in 5 years, so that's sad, and that's our world. So I'm conscious of it and clumsy with it is probably the truest answer to the question. And still trying to figure out how to work effectively with it. How to use it in a way that we can all learn from it. Yeah.
I'm hearing maybe some clumsy attempt, just to use your word, at diffusing or redistributing what is just automatically given to you.
Yes, I suppose the clumsiness is I'm not sure I'm very elegant at doing that. The diffusing and the redistributing. I can extract myself so that stuff's not projected onto me, which is fine. It's a way of managing it, but it feels like there's another step up. There's a more artful way of doing that, and I'm not sure that's very refined for me yet. Yeah.
We're all learning.
We're all learning, indeed. Yeah.
So maybe to take a little bit of the sort of personal pressure off. Can I ask about Gestalt now? Where does the Gestalt come into your life on all of this, between Cambodia and relearning and university and all of this stuff?
Yeah. a year or two after I came back to South Africa, I met Chantel Wiley, who I think has also been on this podcast. My brother used to do African peacekeeping work with an organization called Accord, and I think he knew Chantel from there and from the sort of Durban days. So he knew, obviously what I was getting into, and he said, go have a chat with Chantel. So at that stage, she was actually living in Hout Bay, where I am now. So I came over here and we went for a walk on the beach with her gigantic Great Danes. And we talked about Gestalt, this funny word. I don't know what she was talking about. She's she had sort of her husband is German and she speaks German, so she has an appropriate pronunciation. I have no idea what she was going on about, but she very fortuitously for me, Edwin and Sonia Nevis were coming out to Cape Town shortly after we spoke to run it must have been the first series of the Cape Cod model training, and she said, do you want to come? There was some, I think there was a big group of government people and there were a few spaces for extras. I was like, yeah, sure, I'll come along.
I will be an extra.
Yeah. Not knowing that I was basically going to meet Mr. and Mrs. Rockstar of Gestalt in organizations. So I had this extraordinary experience of meeting Edwin and Sonia, and John and Kum was here for that training as well, and a couple of other people. And what happened in that first workshops, kind of what I was talking about at the beginning, it was like look beneath the surface. It was, here's a group of people talking. They're talking about this, they're talking about that, they're talking about the next thing. Okay, now comment on the process. It's like, oh, what do you mean comment on the process? And then now it was like peeling back the covers, and now there's a whole new thing going on here. And if you can work at that level, you can bring about change at that level. I was like, whoa, this is crazy. So I was totally just delighted. It was very, very well taught. Like, they're just so good at their instruction. And I realized I was working with people who were very good practitioners and very good teachers. And there was this, I just felt like the veil were lifted, and there was this whole way of working with individuals and obviously with myself. And that's kind of what got me into Gestalt. So I then did, they came out again for the second training, and then blah, blah, on it went. Yeah.
So what have you found in it?
What have I found in it?
Mm-hmm.
In Gestalt?
Mm-hmm.
I think I found a way of working, of giving that language. So there's a very small bridge from learning Gestalt to teaching other people Gestalt. Like, that's a very small chain, right? So take data and meaning making, right? That's a really cool concept of Gestalt. You can teach somebody in 3 minutes, right? Do a little bit of extra exercise work. 45 minutes later, they're done. So, and it has crazy implications. So unlike, becoming a Jungian analyst and you go and study for 15 years, and then, you're never teaching Jungian work to your clients, yeah. You're just doing the work. Whereas this, you can learn a tool, use the tool, teach the tool, and now your coachee is going off and they are able to understand the difference between data and meaning making and use that in how they engage with other people. So that aspect of, and which I think is why I enjoy the teaching work that we do at Gestalt Africa, because it's so obviously useful and so tangible. People come, we've just come back from Ghana. People have been with us for a week. They're going to go back to their organizations. They're going to use this stuff. It's fantastic,
Thank you.
So
Thank you very much for articulating this, because I've seen so many people go the opposite direction and try and layer like entire books that they're writing, abstraction upon abstraction upon philosophy upon complexity, that for me is counterintuitive. And I've seen so many people hold on to this, I will never be enough, I will never be ready. But I mean, for me, Gestalt is sort of predicated on phenomenology, which is, it's the obvious. It should be as simple as you're describing it in my very simple mind.
Yeah. I mean, so phenomenon, you work with someone, you're having a conversation. Oh, you smiled after I said that. And yes, and that triggers a whole new thing. Look, it's right in front of you. It's right here.
You just did it. Yes.
Yeah. So you demonstrate this. Suddenly people have got access to a whole new way of operating just by using the phenomena, right? And it's so simple and it can be applied so broadly. So that's totally my thing. I remember Edwin, I think, really ramming this down our throats when we were learning. Said, don't hang on the jargon. Don't get all complicated. Don't use words with the clients that they aren't going to understand. And I love that about it. Help leaders develop range. Well, that's not that complicated to understand. You can explain that in 2 minutes, and the word is in our lexicon. We're not talking about
do it, not to make people feel perpetually frustrated that they're not doing it right.
Yeah. So that, and the sort of optimism bias, and the start from where people are, and there's so many. Well, maybe this is another thing I'll say. In fact, maybe this is the main point. It didn't then and doesn't now feel like there's a separation between the work and the person, me. Mm-hmm. So if I'm going to, it's almost like it works the other way around. Can I adopt a stance of optimism? Okay, cool. That's going to have an impact on my world, obviously. And now how do I use it in the work? So it's so, you're not just learning stuff that you can go and use with your clients. It's completely applicable to yourself and how you move through the world and how you are with other people in whatever setting. So the I don't know what you call that, universal applicability or some fancy word, but something like that that was one of the things that really got me excited about this work.
And could you say more about what you specifically do with it? I mean, what is your thing? Like when you say consulting and development, what is that?
Well, mostly I say coaching. Okay. So I'll start there. What is that? If I had to kind of describe the essence of what I do as a coach, I think it would be supporting, I'll use this term bracketed and caveated, whatever, but supporting leaders to grow up. Okay. And I say, I don't know, I kind of love the phrase, because not in you have to grow up, a sort of demeaning, condescending sort of way, but it's all of our job to grow up. I really do think that. I think it's my job as an individual, as a father, husband, professional, whatever, to mature, evolve, learn. I don't know why grow up grabs me as a phrase, but there's a kind of personal maturity path that I think we all need to keep marching along, and that's the work that I do as a coach to help leaders along that path. So, often it's about awareness, helping them to see what's going on in them that's under the surface, that's not so obvious, helping them to see how the external world is a reflection of the internal world, yeah, I mean, we can get into the details of it, but that's the sort of essence of the work, I think. Yeah.
What are some of the challenges that you run into doing what you do, either in the systems or in the individual relationships or in the larger context?
Some of the challenges, I have many. How many do you want?
Go, whichever.
My challenges sometimes come in pairs, and in pairs, there's a kind of impatience and a collusion pair. So sometimes I want people to move faster than they are, and I push them, and kind of, yeah, they feel a bit judged, I think, because I'm kind of on them a bit. And then sometimes I flip to this collusion. I'm totally with them, and I don't. I go at their pace so completely that they never have a sense of, oh, there could be something else, so I don't. So maybe the way of summing that up is kind of not, sometimes I don't sit at the boundary very effectively. I kind of stay too far away from it, or I cross it. Yeah.
The dosification of the self.
Yeah, dosification, I like that. Yeah. And I find my working with big systems, my levels of impatience rise quicker.
Really? You find bureaucracy crazy making?
How strange.
Not relatable at all.
Well,
Mexico and South Africa have nothing in common.
No, we've done a lot of work with governments. Jeremy and I met when we were working in National Treasury, and I think government has its own particular brand of solidification. Yeah. So it gets, that this might be career limiting, but my patience there does get a little bit thin, and I know I'm not very effective when I'm impatient. Yeah. Unlike many other people who are amazingly effective when they're impatient.
I also do not thrive in that experience. No, it's interesting. I mean, government systems tend to be a fixed gestalt. I mean, there are so many, like, actual physical, everything from physical buildings to systems to computer systems. Like, it becomes so overly structured, it becomes rigid. It's crazy.
Yeah. It is. I'm somebody who I'm quite imaginative. I spend time imagining and wondering how the world, my life, the job, whatever could be different, and what blah blah blah. And then I kind of get excited about moving towards that. And I think in those big bureaucratic systems, there isn't the freedom to do that. So I suppose I get hopeless quite quickly, because like, well, what do we do if we're not going to imagine things could be different? What are we doing here? Yeah.
It's not exactly a creative space.
Not so much. No. And creativity is important. Super important.
So another question sort of about your Gestalt self is, do you feel part of a Gestalt community? I mean, does that mean anything to you? If so, what?
Oh, yes, I do. I feel very lucky. I feel very lucky to be able to say yes to that. I think in significant part through this organization we've created, Gestalt Africa, and the role I've been able to play in that. I'm with Gestalt people a lot where the focus is Gestalt. That's not just a collection of Gestalt people who are, doing culture change and wherever. This is like, let's talk, how we're doing this. And we have, we run a community of practice once a month, where, which is deliberately for that. And Gestalt Africa has been going for like 2 years now, maybe a little bit long, 2.5 years or so. So we've got a bit of a cohort now, a kind of group of alumni, which is really great. So we've got these sort of longer relationships with people, and we're starting to see people who've been using the stuff we've taught and helped them learn, and they've been doing their own thing with it, and they're bringing it back and showing us how they're doing it in a different way. And it, community for me, the excitement of community for me is when you take the hierarchy out, right? So in the formal Gestalt Africa structures, we've got sort of faculty teaching the program and participants who come in. But if you when you can take that out, and it's just a group kind of this sort of needed a bit this community who are there doing what the community needs and helping each other out and learning from each other, and I don't know, doing whatever that might be. It's pretty great, and it's wonderful seeing the energy, seeing how it's like it builds a life of its own, and then this thing starts to roll. I think that's the bit that really interests me. I can put lots of energy into making things happen, but where's the energy coming from? It's got to complete that cycle. When things
resonating,
when things get sort of find their own legs and start running on their own, and that's where it gets really exciting. So at the moment, faculty, whatever, play more of a role in hosting the community of practices, but I'm super excited to see a point at which that moves out to the community. Yeah, exactly. And that's a great question. I'm going to start chatting to the faculty now about that and seeing if next year we can hand some of those over. Let whoever wants to run one, let's go and let's see what happens. That starts to get really exciting and interesting. Yeah.
So do you have, this might be a storytelling moment, do you have a particular memory within Gestalt that stands out to you I've interviewed people who hear Laura Pearl's voice in their ear 50 years later. They can remember the exact words, some of these, like, this was a moment that I will carry.
Yes.
Your eyes go up and there's a flashback sequence.
There were a few things apart. Yes, I do, and I've forgotten it, but I'll talk and maybe it'll come back. I've forgotten the details, but that first Cape Cod model, when Edwin and Sonia Nevis were in South Africa and they were running this program, Sonia wanted to demonstrate working with dyads. And she wanted a dyad to volunteer to work with. So, ignorance is bliss. So my sister was there on the course with me, and we volunteered to be the dyad. We have got, our family dynamic is quite intense, and we love each other dearly, and we fight like hell, and we are very competent at voicing our disagreements and very good at defending our position and explaining why the other person's is erroneous, which makes which is pretty awesome. So off we trotted up to the front. There must have been, I don't know, 30 people in the room, complete strangers. Room. We'd known them for a day or two or something, and Sonia sat down with us and she let us, she barely sort of blew the whistle, and we were like out the blocks having an extraordinarily open, candid conversation about our family. I can't remember what it was about, but it was some family dynamic, and we went. I remember at one point she tried to stop us, and we just tossed her out and carried on. I don't know if we were quite yelling at each other, but we were certainly not holding back. And we wrapped it up, and Sonia was amazing, as Sonia was. And in closing it all down, she was if I remember right, she was a couples therapist, right? I think that was her background. Yeah. So she knew about dyads, and she said for relationships, in all the work that she's done, for relationships to succeed, they need to be able to, the people in the relationship, she said there are three things that have to be present. The first is you have to be able to tolerate disappointment. And the second is you have to have a sense of humor. And I've never been able to remember what the third one is.
It would be invincible.
Yeah. I've told that story at about 3 weddings when I was best man or making a speech or something. And I've always said, I can't remember what the third one is. So the third one is lost to the mystery. But those two have been incredibly profound. She had such expertise. She'd been working with, I don't know, tens of hundreds, I don't know, many thousands of couples. And she had kind of distilled these 3 now two nuggets of wisdom,
which is both disappointing and funny that you can't remember.
Yeah, that's just totally standard for me. But those the 2 of the 3, being able to tolerate disappointment and being able to say, I'm disappointed and it's not the end of the world and it's not your fault, it's just that I'm disappointed, I think has been a real important lesson for me and a reminder. It's very live for me, and I use it in my work, with leaders often, the leader who's shouting and screaming and going off at their team is often unable to handle disappointment. So that feels like a really simple but powerful nugget. And then sense of humor, right? It's like the world's not going to end. Can we have a chuckle? It feels, coming from somebody as wise and deep as Sonia, it carries real gravitas. Yeah.
Wonderful.
And I know you are all about humor, right? Aren't you you're doing a course on humor?
I am. That is one of my favorite things.
Okay, plug humor. Tell us about humor. I'd love to know.
Oh no, it's a whole other thing, but it's it's such an essential part of humans, and it's social and it's relational, and it has many emotional and psychological functions. And just the aesthetic of like needing that resolution. I need the punchline. I need your third element, and you didn't have it, and that's funny.
The Zeigarnik effect just not helping us out right now.
No, but it's that, the incongruence, the lack of resolution, the absurdity. It's can be a very existential kind of experience.
Yeah.
I think one of my last questions is probably what's next for you? Where do you see yourself going with this, taking this, diverging from this?
So what's next for me? Well, Gestalt Africa is a big part of it. And we are really in the infancy stages of it. We've just launched our first year-long leadership program. We need to finish the first one and harvest the learnings. But I'm really committed to and excited about developing Gestalt Africa. I don't know what it looks like. I don't know with who. I don't know what shape it. Full unknowns. But
don't overthink that.
Yeah. Well, that'll come. But that's certainly on the agenda. And I mean, I must say, it's called Gestalt Africa, but the intention is it's not just about Africa, just in case that isn't clear, right? We think there's a lot about what happens in Africa, which could be interesting, the sort of principles and fundamentals of organization and leadership in Africa, which can be interesting outside of Africa. So we call it Gestalt Africa, not we're putting a boundary around it, but it's not exclusionary. You know, we're really hoping that other people will be interested in it and will
I think they call it
want to.
centering, featuring.
There we go. Yeah, yeah. So that the other kind of big thread is my coaching work. I'm interested in. I think coaching's for where there's a really good fit between the coach and the clients. Coaching is extraordinarily beneficial, as in any. I mean, I'm not. Yeah, if I can lump it in with the sort of therapeutic support, but on the non-psychological side, it's really helpful, and I'm interested to see how to expand the reach, because it's very, very inefficient. I mean, coaching is horrendously inefficient, and how do you keep the personal nature of it, but expand the reach, right? So there are lots of people who are, creating your courses and selling them online. I don't think that's the way to go. But there's something else in the middle of that. I don't know what that looks like. Maybe it's
doing something in the near future that is not that, but will work better. Okay.
Yes. And who knows? Who knows what that'll look like? Yeah, and I think the other thing that I'm interested in is how to use technology better. And the Gestalt schools various Gestalt schools that I've come from are infamously bad at embracing what's available to us these days. So yeah, so I'm very keen to explore what's possible and how do you use the sort of technological tools that are available to us in a way that doesn't alienate, and it doesn't feel like you got to spend your life behind a screen. So there's something in there. I don't know what that looks like. That's what I'm exploring at the moment.
That all sounds very exciting.
Cool.
So do you have any final thoughts that you would like to bring in? Any other piece of yourself that has been left out, or?
Well, I'm an introvert. Despite doing this work with other people, I kind of, my happy place is alone. My recharging place is alone and with small, in small intimate systems. So it's a stretch to be pulled out onto the screen, onto the web, into the world. But I've really enjoyed it. It's really nice to engage with somebody. You've asked incredibly thought-provoking questions that I was not anticipating the depth of. So hopefully I've mumbled through them in a vaguely kind of understandable kind of way.
It's been lovely. It's been fun. Thank you.
Yeah. I wish this word to me is so obviously useful. I wish we could get more people to access it. And I guess that's part of what I'm saying with the tech stuff. Like, how do you tease people into this? Because I think people will just follow when they realize the utility of it. It's kind of natural to get more interested. So yeah, we'll see. Who knows where it goes?
Yeah, I mean, just to add my 2 cents to that thought, I think there's so much really clumsy, to go back to your word, work done on inclusion, especially through technology and gathering systems and things like that. People are not understanding the mechanisms of exclusion. They don't realize what is being done so wrong that it makes it impossible for people to access spaces and activities and events and knowledge and human beings and this community. So I think, yeah, there has to be a lot of relearning about how to use mechanisms of connection. I'm all on board with that. If you figure it out, I will find a way to connect. And
well, maybe the whole point is we the Gestalt community figure it out together, right? I think there's a real need for us to be open and sharing, and what's working in North America, what's working in Singapore, what's working in Mexico, what's working wherever. What are you trying? I think I know you're trying to finish, and I keep opening new things, but I do feel
there's
a
a
real
post-humans community. It's called Open Gestalt. It's where we all take the second conversations too. So.
Perfect. But I'm really driven to introduce more creativity in the way that we do what we do, in the way we teach, and the way we learn, and so on. And I know my creativity gets fired up when I see other people doing interesting and new things. And in our Gestalt Africa little bubble, we see what each other's, I see other guys doing things all the time, and it sparks me up. But there's a lot that's going on outside that. And I suppose one of my reminders to myself is to make sure I'm connected enough to the broader community to see what's going on, and to push the experimentation and the creativity. I think it's super important for us to stay kind of, to keep moving,
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, is it okay for you if we leave it here then?
It is okay for me. Thank you very much. It's been wonderful to connect, and really appreciate you asking all your insightful questions.
Thank you.